Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1981 slasher sequel, Halloween 2. Now, Halloween 2, to me personally, is not that quite inferior to the first film when it comes to its overall quality. I wouldn't personally place it on the same level, but it gets really close, and I think that it's gotten closer to the level of quality of the 1978 classic film than any other Halloween sequel when it comes to the Michael Myers storyline. And I think in large part that has to do with John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, who are instrumental and are a big part of this film's success because of the fact that they wrote the script. John Carpenter also came in at one point and directed some sequences and edited some scenes out to improve the film's pacing and the overall tone. And I feel that actually is something that really elevated this film as well. And it has that feel of the 1978 classic film. The other sequels, they don't really have that same feel and that same vibe. And on one hand, I think that's a good choice because this franchise could only get away with trying to imitate Carpenter once, and you could make an argument that maybe it should not have even done that to begin with. But when it comes to the aesthetics, when it comes to the look, when it comes to the atmosphere and the feel of it, it's the closest that I've seen when it comes to getting on the same level of creepiness as the 1978 classic film. And it helps too. You got Donald Pleasance, who's once again on his A game. Jamie Lee Curtis is back as Laurie Strode. You have some new actors and actresses that, you know, do some solid work as well. Not necessarily on the same level, but still are manage to hold their own. And there are other aesthetic elements and other moments and concepts here that are at work with Halloween 2 that are really quite good. So Halloween 2 is one of those films that, while it's not as close to near perfect as the first film when it comes to its suspense, when it comes to its characters, when it comes to the story, when it comes to its pacing, it's still a really satisfying sequel. And I would say it's a little bit underrated, because when you think about even something like Season of the Witch, which really has nothing to do with Michael Myers and his story, Season of the Witch seems to be a film that has gotten more accolades and has pretty much become a really well-known horror film in horror circles. Halloween 2 isn't really quite there yet. And on one hand, I get it, but on the other, I kind of don't. Especially when you look at the bulk of this franchise. But for the most part, a lot of people who are fans of the Halloween films do appreciate Halloween 2, and for good reason. Rick Rosenthal directed the film. He wasn't the initial choice. In fact, Tommy Lee Wallace, speaking of Season of the Witch, he was attached to the project initially. He eventually left the project, though, due to creative differences. There are different rumors abound. One is that he left it because it was too violent, which I find pretty ironic, because Halloween 3 Season of the Witch is arguably more gory and violent than Halloween 2. But anyway, he left the project for whatever reason. I think he still stayed on board to help Carpenter and company, but he stepped down as director. Rick Rosenthal was brought in and tasked with helming the film, and I think it was a good choice. He definitely had passion for filmmaking and for doing a good job, because it's his first film in terms of directing when it comes to a studio project or a feature film, and you can definitely see that here. He wasn't going through his motions, and I think it also helped that you had a director who already had some kind of relationship with, I think, Carpenter or someone else involved with the production, so they were somewhat familiar with what Rosenthal would bring. In fact, Rosenthal was actually, I think he had the same agent as Carpenter or something like that, where it was like, hey, if Carpenter doesn't get this particular film, or he doesn't want to do a movie, we're going to give you a call. And that's what happened with Halloween 2. And because they saw a lot of similarities in Rosenthal's style to Carpenter's. And that's why I think, ultimately they chose him, is because of the familiarity and the fact that this film because of the fact that this film is one of those movies that they needed to have someone who could accurately or come close to imitating Carpenter's style and the aesthetic of the 1978 film. Now, on one hand, I think he came as close as he possibly could to achieving that tall order. On the other, I think it holds the film back a little bit visually, because you never really get to see Rick Rosenthal's personal stamp on the film, because so much of the movie is just trying to be Carpenter light. And there's only one John Carpenter. So when you're deliberately trying to be Carpenter light, you are deliberately putting yourself in danger and putting a spotlight on your direction in terms of its overall quality, its overall composition. And I think the film probably would have still been just as successful if Rosenthal just directed it the way that he wanted to, instead of, trying to make everything as close to Carpenter style as possible. But I'm not going to be too hard on him because of that fact. He did what he was asked to do, and he did the job well. Especially in moments that were supposed to be more suspenseful, that were supposed to really tighten the viewer's nerves. I really feel that when it comes to those kind of moments in the climax and in other sequences throughout the hospital, I feel he really did a genuinely great job creating that kind of intensity. I don't feel he really had the same power and the same strength as Carpenter showed in the 1978 film when it comes to his direction, but very few filmmakers really have that kind of strength or that kind of ability as Carpenter, so it's not really that big of a knock against Rick. I think it easily could have turned out to be a disaster because of this attempt to try to make it as close to Carpenter as possible. You could have had moments where it's totally obvious that it's not Carpenter and it's just some guy trying to ape Carpenter style, but I don't really feel that it was that obvious, and I think that's due to Rick's genuine talents as a filmmaker in his own right, and also because you had someone like Dean Cundey, who did the cinematography for the 1978 film. So you had a cinematographer who already knew and already was familiar with what the aesthetic was of the 1978 movie. The screenplay by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, I actually think is genuinely a gem. I don't think it's nearly as bad as either of them have said that it was over the years. In particular, Carpenter, who's very hard on this film. He's very hard on his work in this movie, and I think he's too hard on himself. I think this is a really good screenplay, from the characterization, to the dialogue, to the setting, to the more creepy, suspenseful moments, to other concepts that are thrown into the mix that are new and fresh, like the mob at the Myers house, or the whole Ben Tramer deal with the bait and switch. And I also like how the film and the story actually comes up with a legitimate reason to have Jamie Lee Curtis's character Laurie rebuild her resolve and her strength throughout the film. because they easily could have just had her be this, she already had her night of terror. She's already ready. She's already strong. She's fending off Michael, and it's she's ready. But I like the fact that the film finds a way to make her even more vulnerable, to make her weaker in terms of the fact that physically she's not 100%. She's still recovering from her various different injuries that she got when she was dealing with Michael Myers the first time. So when you have a sequence when Michael is right behind her and she's helpless and alone on the asphalt outside of the hospital and has to try to get up in time before he gets her, and also has to try to get back inside the hospital before he gets her, it's a really tense and genuinely terrifying moment because of the fact that she isn't able to physically fend him off in the same way. She isn't able to have that extra step. It also makes the sequence in the last few moments when she is cornered in that hospital room and Michael Myers is there. It makes it even more powerful, and when it comes to its intensity, when it comes to the thrills and the suspense, because of the fact that she has nowhere to go and she's not as strong as she was. So when she ultimately does fight back and does so successfully and shoots him in the eyes, it's such a crowd-pleasing moment. It's such a cathartic scene because of the fact that the screenplay actually found a really effective way of rebuilding her resolve. And I like the twist that Michael Myers is her brother. I know a lot of people hate it. I know Carpenter himself hates it, but I like the twist, and here's why I like the twist. Because during the time that Halloween 2 was released, or at the time of its release, there weren't that many sequels in a franchise like this, so this film was experimenting with a lot of different things. Yes, Empire Strikes Back had come before this with its whole reveal, but I don't really feel that it's the exact same kind of thing. It's a different dynamic, and I think it actually makes things more personal. It makes things more interesting, especially when you look at a lot of the other slasher franchises with slasher icons. There really aren't that many that really have this kind of deep bloodline or this connection in the way that's presented in this film. I think it makes the reason why Michael Myers is so adamant and is just going after Laurie again, it makes it make a whole heck of a lot more sense. Instead of him just being like, I want revenge, or I want to kill her because I didn't kill her in the last movie. I like the fact that there's an extra motivation. It raises the stakes. And even though there are other films in the franchise that absolutely fucked up and ruined this particular concept, that doesn't mean that the idea itself was bad. It just means that the execution later in the franchise was incredibly problematic. And other things that are really good, like I said earlier, the dialogue. I mean, Loomis has just as many memorable lines of dialogue in this as he does in the first film. The classic exchange with the guy who's saying, I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight. You don't know what death is. It's a great scene, a great quote. The moment when he's explaining Sam Hain and its origins, and he mentions how, we are all afraid of the darkness inside ourselves. And I'm like, that's an incredibly poignant and powerful quote and line of dialogue. Because it's true. We really are scared. We really are taken aback by the darkness, within ourselves. I mean, we are all afraid of the dark inside us. And there are other, lines of dialogue that I really liked. Like, funny lines of dialogue. Like the exchange between Bud, Leo Rossi's character, and Pamela Susan Shoop's character, Karen, where Karen is busting his balls for swearing too much, and he's just like, well, I guess I'm just a fuck up. Which I love that because I relate to that. Because I swear a lot. I swear like a fucking sailor if you've watched any of my videos. So, I totally relate to that, because there be people like, you swear too much. I'm like, I guess I'm just a fuck up. And his whole rendition of Amazing Grace, which is hilarious, which I think was improvised by Leo Rossi. And there's just a lot to like about this screenplay. There are some problems with it, and I'll get to those later, but I think the screenplay has more moments that really do work than moments that don't, and that's a sign of a good script. The film also features some really solid performances by the majority of the cast: Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance. Jamie Lee Curtis, I know a lot of people have said things like, I wish that she did more in the movie. I think she did just enough. Keep in mind, she's hurt. She's already been through a absolute banger of a battle with Michael Myers prior to her hospital stay. So she's also tired. She's exhausted mentally and physically, and she's not 100%. So I'm fine with her being, in bed for a good chunk of the movie until, Michael is back and he's chasing after her, and she has to find a way to survive once again. I'm fine with that. I think Jamie Lee handled that well. I personally feel her performance in this is a little bit underrated, especially in the moments when she's truly in a bind. When she did her own stunts and tumbled out of the car and was, crawling on her hands and knees and scraping her fingernails on the asphalt. I thought that was a really good performance. I really did buy that she was truly terrified. She was absolutely in hysterics, for real. And Donald Pleasance, he just really nails this role as Loomis. It was perfect casting in the first film, and he picks up this role as if, he just started shooting right after the other scenes that he already shot in the 1978 film. He doesn't miss a beat, and that's impressive. And I want to give credit to the actor who played Michael Myers, Dick Warlock. I actually think Dick Warlock is the best Michael Myers in terms of the suit actor because of his stuntman experience. And because of his stature, I think he was able to really make Michael even more intimidating and even more of a presence. I don't think he walked too slow. I think his pace was just fine enough. And the fact that he isn't some 7-foot tall, Tyler Mane or, George Wilbur with shoulder pads, I think that actually is to Dick Warlock's benefit. Because Michael Myers is more scary to me if he is of average height or maybe just a little bit over 6 feet. He's not some hulking behemoth. I think the shape really is something that is scarier when it isn't so physically imposing. But the fact that it just keeps coming and it never stops, and that's what makes it all the more intimidating. Because of the fact that, he's not this obvious big muscle-bound, beefy guy. But that's just how I personally view things. And yeah, stuntman experience helped a lot in a lot of different sequences. It helped this young cast really be able to get the most out of their death scenes. And he also had experience in full body burns. So he's the one that did that impressive shot in the end when Michael Myers is on fire and still coming after Jamie Lee Curtis like he's the Terminator before the Terminator. But yeah, I cannot sing enough praises for Dick. I think he did a really good job playing Michael Myers, and it's my favorite suit actor performance. When it comes to wearing the jumpsuit and the mask. But that's just me personally. The other actors are fine. Charles Cyphers He's back as Sheriff Brackett, although I wish he was in the film more. I don't like his replacement because I don't think the guy's that great of an actor, and I feel that Loomis and Brackett, with the way that Pleasance and Cyphers played these characters, had such great chemistry, and I feel it was a mistake to try to have this new actor try to rebuild that chemistry all over again. And I don't think it really worked. So I don't know why Brackett wasn't in the film more. Maybe it had just something to do with Cyphers and his schedule. Whatever it is, that was disappointing, at least a little bit. The fact that you didn't have that same dynamic that was so strong in the 1978 film. Lance Guest has one of his first big roles as Jimmy, and you could see why he would go on to get more roles. He's precocious, he's got this particular charm about him that is really likable, he's charismatic. I don't like the way that his character is handled, though, at the end of the day. They set him up as being this strong character, this important, integral character, love interest for Laurie, and then he slips on some blood, gets knocked out, supposedly left for dead, and that's it. Feels like a waste, if you ask me. And I know there's an alternate ending where he's alive, but that doesn't work either because it's just very awkward and kind of heavy-handed in its emotion. So I would have rather, if you're going to have him and you're going to prop him up as this big character, have him go out with a bang. Have him die heroically, some kind of heroic sacrifice, trying to save Laurie, or something along those lines. Just slipping and falling on blood, and then like passing out in the car doesn't cut it, if you ask me. That's one of the things about the script I think was definitely a letdown, as well as the fact that there isn't the same dynamic with Brackett and Loomis. I understand he's grieving over the loss of his daughter, but wouldn't you think that after, okay, he knows who killed him, and he knows who killed her, and he knows that he's still out there. Wouldn't that make him even more motivated to try to team up with Loomis and catch this guy? Because Hunter von Leer, just, like I said, he didn't cut it. He didn't make the cut for me. Pamela Susan Shoop was fine as Karen. Tawny Moyer, Anna Alicia. Tawny Moyer is Jill. Anna Alicia is Janet. Nancy Stevens, she's back as Marion Chambers. I liked her too. I would have liked to have seen more scenes with her and Loomis. They picked up right where they left off too. Leo Rossi is Bud. Gloria Gifford is Miss Alves. I didn't really care for the guy who played Dr. Mixter, though, Ford Rainey. I think that role was honestly miscast. I didn't really buy him as that particular character. I didn't feel it was really that authentic of a performance, if I can even speak. My apologies. That's what happens when you do everything in one take, and you do it live. But yeah, for the most part, the performances were good. I don't really think the performances for this kind of film were glaringly bad by any means, by anyone involved. You even had a very young Dana Carvey who played I think it was like a character role. I don't even think he had any lines. But I find that kind of funny because Dana Carvey would go on to become famous on SNL. When he would co-star with Mike Myers in the Wayne's World sketches, and then in the Wayne's World films, and other things about this film that I think are noteworthy are absolutely the efforts by John Carpenter and Alan Howarth when it comes to this film's score. The score for Halloween 2 by Carpenter and Howarth is honestly an improvement over the original. As crazy as that sounds, I actually think the score is a little bit better than the score for the first film. And the reason why, it has this gothic, dark tone to it, and this size and this scope. It sounds fuller, it's richer, it resonates more on an even deeper level. It maintains the same really iconic notes, but then it adds some other different layers to it, and Howarth's own touch that really put it over the top for me. It's a really genuinely fantastic score. The score in the opening credits, mixed with this memorable opening credits sequence with the pumpkin that's opening up and there's a skull inside. It's such a phenomenal score, and I think Carpenter and Howarth did a really amazing job with their collaboration with the film's score. Um, I feel the editing is fine too by Mark Goldblatt and Skip Skulnick, especially since Skip Skulnick was brought on pretty much last minute to kind of add some extra things to the film. Mark Goldblatt, he did most of the editing, but Skip came in later. And I think, Skip did a good job making it so it's not obvious that there are two different editors at work here. So they also had a good collaboration as well. It seemed like their style and their preferences of editing seemed to work well with one another. And when it comes to the film's pacing, there are some moments where it kind of drags, especially when there's this scene with this fat security guard and he's bumbling and stumbling around in the dark, complete with a really stock, standard, predictable, lame cat jump scare. The film really started to slow down at that moment. I think that could have been edited down considerably. I didn't buy the delayed suspense. It just felt like it delayed the movie, and it was just delaying the inevitable. Should have just killed him off quicker with a hammer to the back of the head instead of trying to play this fake out game. I don't think it worked at all. I also feel that when it comes to the kills, there are some that really stand out. For instance, the death by steam bath, really painful, really awful, and it's really an unsettling sequence to watch. And I think that's actually a good thing, because I think that's the kind of emotion that you want out of that kind of sequence. Then there are some other sequences that really stand out visually, like the death of one of the nurses when she gets the scalpel in the back and she's lifted up by Dick Warlock, and then her shoes clatter to the floor. The stuff with the needles, even though I think the way that it was shot, I don't know, it wasn't really as effective as it could have been. But it still was adequate enough in terms of its efficiency. And some of the other moments when it comes to the kills also weren't really as effective. In particular, the death of Miss Alves. I don't know what they were doing there. And this seems like it was just an attempt to do something aesthetically, to do something unique aesthetically, and didn't really put a whole lot of thought into it beyond that. Because it makes no sense for Michael Myers to do something so complicated. To, tie her up and stick something in her arm and bleed her out. It makes no sense that he would go through all that trouble just for, a shot of a room full of blood. And it's unsatisfying, too, because that's how you set up Lance Guest's demise and how he ultimately is taken out of the film. So yeah, I don't really like that scene. I know some people do. I'm not a fan of it. I don't think it's executed very well. But things that are executed well, the climax. The last 15 to 20 minutes of the movie, to me, are every bit as nail-biting and chilling and suspenseful as the last 15, 20 minutes or so of the 1978 film. There are some other added elements that are thrown into the suspense that I really liked. For instance, along with the more intense score, you have things like Michael Myers crunching on glass as he's slowly coming after Laurie Strode, and she's frantically trying to get the elevator to move. So stuff like that really does make the finale really effective when it comes to its suspense. And then you have other things also that are thrown into the mix. Just the stuff where Michael Myers, when he's shot in the eyes and he's just blindly swiping at the air, And then you have just the explosive final moments when, Loomis is, it's time, Michael, and blows up the oxygen tanks, and it's this massive explosion. How Loomis or Michael survived that beats me, but I'll talk about that when I talk about part 4. But it's such a great, grand way to end the movie. Overall, like I said, I really liked Halloween 2. I think it's a really good sequel for the most part. Even though there are some moments where it kind of misses the mark, most of the time it's on target. It provides and gives you exactly what you want and what you are asking for when it comes to a sequel in a franchise. And sadly, like I said, it didn't really get better than this as the series would go on. There's some sequels in this franchise that I still like and I enjoy, but even the ones that I liked and I did feel were noteworthy, at least at points, they didn't really come close to the overall effectiveness and quality of Halloween 2.